Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Explore podcast. I'm Matt Miofsky. Thank you so much for doing this, being part of Explore. Hopefully, you're going to the classes, finding those meaningful. And today, I want to shift. We've talked about the Bible. We've talked about what we believe about Jesus. These are two foundational things in any church, but I think they also are part of what makes our church distinct. And today we get to another feature that I think makes the gathering distinct. And that is, like, what denomination are we a part of? I get asked this question a lot. Now, some people don't care necessarily. Some of you care a lot. But most of you are just curious, like, what are the differences between the denominations? How did we get all these denominations anyway? Where does the gathering fit in? We're a United Methodist Church, so what does that mean? That's what today is about. I want to talk about kind of the Christianity family tree, I like to call it. Like, where did all these denominations come from? What is United Methodism exactly as a denomination? And why is the gathering a part of that denomination? So that's really what I want to answer. And we're going to start off just by learning, because all of this has a 2,000-year history, right? I mean, when Jesus lived, when he died, when he was resurrected, there weren't different churches. There was just a group of followers. And very quickly, the Apostle Paul, we read about this in the Bible, started planting churches all over the Roman Empire. Now, really quickly, something to understand about the Roman Empire is we call it one empire, but it was a lot of different former countries and territories. They spoke a lot of different languages, had a lot of local customs and politics. So over time, it was pretty natural that the churches planted in all these various places started to take on kind of a different flavor. Now, one of the main epicenters for the church was Rome. The tradition has it that this is where Paul died. It makes sense. It was the largest city. It was the city that sort of inspired a lot of the action that went out to the provinces. And so Christianity really took off in Rome. A second place where Christianity was big was, of course, near Jerusalem and the place where Jesus actually lived. So this would have been the Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire. And so you had churches in both of these areas, over in Rome, where they primarily spoke Latin, over in the East, where they primarily spoke Greek. And these churches sort of grew up alongside each other. It was all part of one denomination, but you could sort of see that there was this increasing tension, and eventually the first big split, what historians call a schism, happened between the church in the West, that was Rome, and the church in the East, that was kind of everything east of Rome. And this happened around the year 1000, a little bit later than that. And there were a lot of things that caused the split. There were some minor theological differences. They had different customs about the way that they did things. They spoke different languages. But the really big thing is they just had different politics. By this time, the East was still part of the empire. The West had broken away. It was no longer part of the Roman Empire. They just had developed in different directions. And so today we see really the result, the vestiges of that first split. So we have a Roman Catholic Church. That's the church in the West, in Rome, that spoke Latin and all that. So many of you grew up Catholic. In this country, Roman Catholicism, of course, is big. And the church in the East ended up being called the Orthodox Church. A lot of you have heard of the Orthodox Church. Maybe some of you grew up in one. And the Orthodox Church tended to take different names depending on what country it was in. So you had the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Latvian Orthodox Church, if you're a Seinfeld fan. So that was how we got those two main branches of Christianity. So we're going to focus on the church in the West, because the Roman Catholic Church is what would end up giving us most of the denominations that we see in the United States. So the Roman Catholic Church kept on going until another big thing happened. Around the year 1500, there's this guy named Martin Luther. A lot of you know who Martin Luther is, perhaps, but in the early 1500s, he was a Roman Catholic person, cleric, a monk, and he decided that he had had enough of some of the abuses within the Catholic Church. And so he decided to object to 95 different things, and he nailed them famously to the door of a church in his village. And it had 95 issues that he had with the Roman Catholic Church. Well, fast forward, and Luther ended up leading a split that happened. he was protesting what was happening in the church. And so his movement was called the Protestant Reformation. That was really the root of where we get all of our different denominations in Protestant Christianity today. Of course, Luther's movement became known as the Lutheran Church. That makes sense. It was really most prominent in the German-speaking areas of Europe at that time. But pretty soon, different offshoots of this also started happening. There were other reformers, people like John Calvin, maybe you've heard of him. And from that tradition, we get a lot of the Reformed traditions that we see today. That means like the Presbyterian Church and the certain forms of the Baptist Church, the Anabaptist Church, the Mennonite Church. And then in England, a very particular thing happened. There was yet another split, a different branch. And that is when Henry VIII decided he wanted to get a divorce. Catholic Church said no divorce. Henry VIII said, that's fine, you're out. I'll just start my own church. I'll be the head of it. Instead of the Pope, we'll call it the Church of England. And that's essentially where we got the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. And it's within the Church of England that the Methodist movement really started. So that is a very fast history of Christianity, but it gives you just kind of a sense of where it all started and as it developed. And like I said, all these different splits and branches usually happen because of theological differences. They saw things differently, a lot of political differences. Sometimes it was about power, sometimes it was about ideas. But then within the Church of England, by the time John Wesley was born in around 1703, something had happened to the Church of England. It had grown pretty stale. Now this Reformation, the split from the Catholic Church, had happened 200 years earlier almost. And by the time Wesley was living, the church had just kind of become stale. And you can imagine this because in many ways, I think we're back to that in the United States. The church is sort of stale. And Wesley was an Anglican priest. He went to school at Oxford, it was a famous university at the time, still today. And so he was really well educated, but he started to notice something. As he was a priest, he noticed that people came to church, not very many people, by the way, but even the people who came to church, they looked like they were sort of going through the motions. The way that Wesley put it is he said, they have the form of religion without the power. And I think what he meant is their heart just wasn't in it. They were doing it, they were doing the thing, but they really weren't feeling anything. They weren't demonstrating changed lives. They weren't serving people out in the community. They were just kind of going through the motions. And I think a lot of us understand what that feels like. Maybe that was you at various points in your relationship with the church, just kind of going through the motions, having the form of religion, but not the power of it. And so Wesley decided to do something about it. And this started actually when he was in college. He noticed that people went to church, they didn't really do anything else. So he and a few friends formed a club at Oxford. They were college students. And in this club, they were going to try to be what they called real Christians. I mean, they really wanted to follow Jesus like they meant it. And so they didn't just go to church on Sunday, but they decided to meet. And when they met, they would talk to each other about their spiritual life. Where are you struggling? Where are you sinning? That's kind of a tough question. What are you trying to work on in your life? They would study scripture. They would pray for each other. And then they would even begin to go out in the community and serve. The first place there was a prison near Oxford, the Oxford prison. And they began going there and visiting with the inmates and serving people that Jesus commanded us to serve. They really wanted to live out their faith. Now, other students kind of saw them and sort of made fun of them and called them radicals and all sorts of things. But one of the names that they called them was the Methodists because they had this method. They thought that you had to do all these things in order to be a real Christian. And that name kind of stuck. They adopted it. And that's really where the Methodist Church began. Now, as Wesley got older, as he became a priest, his goal was really not to start a new denomination, but really to start what we today would probably call a small group ministry. He wanted to start a revival movement within the Church of England. And he thought the way to do that was go to church on Sunday, but get in these groups. He called them classes. And in the class, you can talk about your faith. You can wrestle with what you're going through and how you're trying to grow. You can pray for each other and study scripture. And in this group, you could give money. They would do that. They would all pool up their money, and then they'd go out in the community and they'd serve people the way that Jesus commanded us to serve. And Wesley really thought this way people won't just be going through the motions, they'll actually be doing the things that Jesus asked us to do. I mean, Wesley didn't disagree with the theology of the Church of England. It wasn't a political thing. He just wanted people's hearts to be in it. And so one of the things that makes Methodism, I think, kind of unique is we're one of the few denominations that didn't start over a fight. It wasn't a fight over baptism or theology or what you thought about Jesus. It wasn't a fight over politics or anything like that. It was really just a movement seeking to make sure that people didn't just have the form of religion, but were experiencing the power of a relationship with Jesus. Now, this small group movement really kind of exploded, and some surprising things started to happen. There were some features of this Methodist movement within the Church of England that were really kind of unique. People loved it at the time. I still love it today. One of those was, of course, small groups. I mean, the power of Methodism is it could start kind of anywhere. Any little village that had people, you could band them together and start a class. It was easy. It was led by a lot of lay people. You didn't need to be a professional or go to seminary or have read the Bible inside and out. You just needed to be willing to lead one of these classes, and Wesley would kind of give out information to teach you how to do it. Third, Methodism was doing something that at the time was kind of unique. It was sort of putting together this idea of a personal relationship with Jesus, which Wesley thought was really important, but pairing that alongside this idea of social action, of actually going out and engaging the problems of the world, trying to love your neighbor in better ways. So it paired together two things that I think are really beautiful. This idea that we're called to have a personal relationship with Jesus, but also to love other people in the way of Jesus out there in the world. Some of the examples were the Methodists, like in the city of London. They didn't just go to church, but they bought an old cannon factory. It's called a foundry. And in there, they would have their class meetings. They would pray for each other. They would get together in groups, but they would also have classes for kids. They would teach kids how to read, and they would give out medicine to families who couldn't afford it, and food to people who didn't have the money to buy it. They wanted to actually address the social problems they were seeing in the city at the time. And then the last kind of unique feature is Wesley noticed that, like normal everyday people, they weren't coming in these big fancy cathedral-like churches to go to the Church of England on Sunday. And he decided, actually at the request of another one of his friends, to start leaving the church behind and going to meet people where they were. This was called field preaching at the time. He would go to like mines where guys were working, and when they got off their shift, Wesley would be there and say, hey, if you want to listen to a message, let me share good news with you. And they did, and like thousands of people would listen to him. This was kind of the most controversial thing he did. The people in the Church of England sort of didn't think you were supposed to do it. It was kind of an early precursor to fights today about the way you're supposed to do church. And so all that really became a strong movement in England. But then it got transported over to the United States because so many people from England were coming to the States. And Wesley sort of ordained a few people to go over to the United States, start this movement there. One of those guys was Francis Asbury, and he's really the one who brings Methodism to, we weren't even in the United States then, just the colonies over here in America. And it was ideal for the colonies because we were kind of a rough country. We didn't have big cities. People were living all over the place. And Methodism was perfect. You didn't need a church building. You didn't need a fancy cathedral. You didn't need educated people. You just needed a leader and people who wanted to get together in homes to form these classes. And so Methodism exploded in the United States. After the Revolutionary Wars, you might imagine, they didn't want to be part of the Church of England. So that's really when it became kind of its own church in the United States, the Methodist Church. And it grew to be one of the largest denominations in the US, the second largest Protestant denomination after Southern Baptists. And today, it's still a very strong presence, over 20,000 churches in the United States. That's just United Methodism. If you take into account some of the other branches, which I'll talk about, there's over 30, probably almost 40,000 churches of some Methodist variety in the United States. And not just in the United States, but now it's a global denomination. There's churches in Africa and Europe and South America and Asia, nearly every continent. And so what is it that makes Methodists sort of distinct? Well, there's a few things that I would name that I think are really important. One is Methodists have women in ministry, and that actually goes back a long way, all the way back to Wesley. Wesley actually allowed women to do something that at the time they didn't do. They were able to lead and to teach and to even preach. He learned this, by the way, from his mom, who was much smarter than his dad. Even though his dad was a priest, his mom was deeply religious and would lead large meetings, or what we might call like a Sunday school class. So we have women in leadership. I think that's really an important distinctive. I know it's important to many of you. There's still a lot of churches even today in the 21st century that will not allow women to be in leadership. Second, we have what's called an open communion table. I love this. I know many of you notice this. What that means is that everybody is welcome to come to communion. The Methodist Church has always had a very open and welcoming kind of posture toward the world. You don't have to be a member of the church. You don't have to have been baptized or sign a statement of faith. Everybody's welcome to come, because Wesley believed that the very act of coming to communion could help you to know Jesus, to even decide to be a follower of Jesus. We baptize both infants and adults. And so you're able to be baptized as an infant. That's important in the Methodist Church because we think that baptism is about what God does for us. Not something that we have to earn or deserve, but it's just a sign that God loves us and claims us, and therefore we baptize babies and all the way up to adults. You can get baptized at any time. And then a fourth feature that a lot of you know about is pastoral appointments. We have a bishop, several bishops in the United Methodist Church, and the bishops decide where the pastors go, typically once a year. And so if you grew up Methodist or you know anything about the Methodist Church, usually it was the church in town that got a new pastor every 4 or 5 years. Although today, they're tending to leave people in places a lot longer. I've been at the gathering now 19, 20 plus years, and I hope to be here a lot longer. And so let me talk about like today, where the United Methodist Church is. And what's important to us kind of here at the gathering, why we're a part of it. The United Methodist Church, like a lot of denominations, the past many years, really this past decade, has gone through a lot of turmoil and a lot of division of its own. It's about a lot of things, but most importantly about how the church wanted to be a ministry with LGBTQ people. And I won't go through all the specifics, but back in 2024, the United Methodist Church finally decided to remove its anti-gay language, restrictions that used to be there that said gay people couldn't be married in the United Methodist Church, couldn't become pastors or lead in the United Methodist Church. And we took those clauses out so that everyone was welcome to participate in the full life of the church. Because of that, the churches that disagreed over that left. They left the denomination. Some of them formed a new Methodist denomination called the Global Methodist Church. Others of them just decided to be independent Methodist churches. But it's one of the reasons that we went from about 30,000 to about 20,000 churches. But for us at the gathering, that was actually, we thought, a faithful move. Since the beginning of our start in 2006, the gathering has really had this distinctive of wanting to welcome all people, including LGBTQ people, into the full life of the church. We often have people in our church that don't feel like they belong in other churches, not just people in the LGBTQ community, but we have here people who've been burned at the church or bored by the church, people who maybe asked questions and were told that you can't ask questions and have faith, people who didn't want to go to a church where people all believe the same thing or vote the same way or look the same way or have the same perspectives or were forced to have the same viewpoints, but rather a church that was just more open, more welcoming of you, whether you grew up in church or didn't, whether you know the Bible or don't know the Bible, whether you are conservative or liberal, whether you vote this way or that way. Wherever you are, whoever you are, here at the gathering, we want you to feel welcome as you are, and then we're going to challenge each other to grow in light of who Jesus is. And you can kind of see in our church some of those signs of early Methodism. Like, we have core groups. Those are really important to us. You're in Explore. This is like a small group. This was a key feature of the Methodist Church. I love that. The idea that you don't just go to church on Sunday, but you get together with other people to talk about your faith. We still believe in this church that puts together a personal relationship with Jesus, which I think is so important. I talked about that last week. But pairing that with this need to get engaged in the social issues of the world, because Jesus told us to love our neighbor. And we put both of those together here at the gathering. I think that's really important. It even means sometimes we wade into sensitive or controversial things because we believe that Jesus calls us to that. We have lay leadership. That means that most of the work of our church is not led by people like me who went to seminary for it, but people like you. I mean, our core groups are led not by people who know the Bible inside and out, not by people who've been to seminary, but by people who are just faithful and want to follow Jesus, feel that nudge to lead other people. We still have this deep belief that we're called to not just expect people to come to the church, but to go out to meet people where they are. That's why we start new sites and have ministries that happen outside the doors of the church. And so that's part of the reason that we're United Methodist, because I really believe it's a denomination that fits not only who we are, but what I think the church needs to be right now in our country. Some of you have heard me say this before. Our country has become so divided. Our churches have become so homogenous where certain churches want you to think the same way and believe the same way and vote the same way. They have very little tolerance for questions. Many churches want you to check your brain at the door. They're only concerned with your personal relationship with Jesus and don't really talk about hard or nuanced issues in the world. And that's just not the church that we think Jesus calls us to be. Instead, we want to be a church, sometimes it's called a big tent church, that welcomes a lot of different kinds of people, where you don't all have to think the same way or believe the same things or have the same perspectives or vote the same way. A church where we can truly talk to one another, where we can share our doubts and struggle with what exactly it is that we believe. A church that doesn't expect you to check your brain at the door, but that wants you to bring that brain in, because part of being faithful is thinking critically about our faith, feeling the love of God in our hearts, and then doing something with our hands, actually following Jesus. So that's why the gathering is United Methodist. I hope as I describe that also resonates with you. And so I just want to let you know, if you want to learn more about the denomination that we're a part of, you can go. We have a great website. It's just umc.org, UnitedMethodistChurch.org. You can kind of learn about the denomination. There's Methodist churches all over. They look very different from each other, but I think at the center is these distinctives that I talked about. But next week, we're going to end with kind of what makes the gathering distinct even amongst United Methodist churches. Like, what's our particular mission and vision, and how do we think we're supposed to follow Jesus, and what does it look like to be a member here at the church? I'm going to talk about all that next week. So I hope you'll join me back next week for the final week of Explore. Have a great day.